Welcome to Happily Ever After is just the beginning. Keeping your relationship not just together, but happy, and we mean truly happy, is part art and part science. You've come to the right place. Here's your host, Leslie Dories.
Way back in the summer of 2011, that's 8 years ago, people, Time magazine had a cover story on Chore Wars and how this was a problem in many marriages. So fast forward to today, 8 years later, and it seems like nothing has changed. A May 4th piece that appeared in the New York Times and various posts that pop up on Facebook are bringing or actually keeping this topic front and center. The result? Defensive men and angry, resentful women. Now, that's a recipe for marital disaster in my book. So after writing what I thought was a pretty effective article on how to solve the dreaded Chore Wars problem back in 2011, I'm really curious as to why what should be a pretty straightforward solution is being missed. So to help me address this puzzle, I've asked Vicki Larson. She's the founder of the OMG Chronicles blog and the co-author of The New I Do, Reshaping Marriage for Skeptics, Realists, and Rebels. Love that title, to help unpack this. So, Vicki, thanks so much for coming back on the show and revisiting this topic.
Well, Leslie, thank you so much for having me on the show, and I'm sorry that we have to actually revisit this topic. So you part of why I asked you to come back on is because you wrote a blog piece, tackled the issues that they raised in the New York Times piece in a post that you titled, Stop Assuming Your Husband Will Do His Fair Share. And I'm about ready to write another piece entitled, Husbands, Stop Helping Around the House. And before we get into why those titles mean something other than what most people think, how would you define this ongoing problem, this Chore Wars issue, this what is going on? Well, I wish I had the key definitive answer to that, except that what seems to happen is that I think couples, even young couples, have the best of intentions to split chores and equally. I think they really do, especially, young people nowadays. They've heard so much about this and really are much conscious about the way they want to shape their relationships. And then kids come along and no one's really prepared for that. And that is when the gender divide happens. And it happens pretty quickly, like as soon as the baby is born. And then it falls into this, what women do and what men do, even when they don't really want to fall into those gendered patterns. It just kind of happens, and before they know it, they're stuck in it. And very often the women are not happy in it.
Right. And, and I always tell people, babies come with a lot to do, but they don't come with any more time. And so, the way I look at it, something has to give. And it's really hard because, especially in the early days, when babies are first born, nobody knows what to do. I mean, I was 33 when I had my first child, and I babysat, and I'd had a younger brother. I mean, I'd been around babies, so it wasn't like it was a complete mystery. But when they're yours 24/7 and you're exhausted, it's a whole nother thing.
Right.
And,
yes.
And my husband was very helpful. But especially in this country, you don't get a whole lot of time to, kind of get your feet under you before you're thrown back into the work world, whether you're a mom who works outside the home or whether you're a dad who works outside the home, or heaven forbid both of you work outside the home, because that just creates even more problems. And it seems like it's just everybody's being set up for failure.
Well, we're still in a society and a workplace that assumes that there is someone at home and like the breadwinner homemaker model. We're still kind of set up for that, even though that isn't the reality anymore. And of course, it's often seen as, quote unquote, the best way, the natural way. It's what I think people who want to make America great again imagine it to be. They're putting on rose glasses to the 50s, which was really an anomaly in the way families raised children for for eons. Their families had help. They had help. And families today don't have help, and that, of course, is a much bigger issue for another day, but that is part of the problem. And if you don't, or they have to hire help, which will alleviate some problems, but then it gets into social justice issues because generally they're women of color, poorly paid, and that's a whole other thing. But yes, so we're living in a society that is not really, it seems to be ignorant of the fact that people have children, men and women, and that, and we have to do some things about that if we're going to say families are the backbone of society. Okay, well, we really need to help those families.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I made a promise to myself a long time ago, and so far I've never been called upon to use it, but I had sworn to myself that the next time I heard somebody tell me that the children are our future or it's all about the children, I was going to call them on that, because those are nice words, but the society isn't actually set up that way. Because yes, families there would be much more support, because there are still some families that have multi-generations and whatever, but I was hundreds of miles away from both my mother and my mother-in-law. I had one sister who was probably, she was on the other side of the state that I lived in. I mean, there was nobody when I had my son who was part of a support system. And luckily my husband had a boss who didn't really care when he came into work. It's just like, come in, get your work done. I don't care if you're here at 3:00 in the morning, just get it done.
Right.
So my husband was able to be around, but that's not the normal thing. And so, I think this Chore Wars issue, and maybe this is the next thing to talk about, is it's more a symptom of the problem than necessarily the problem itself, although it is a real issue. Because I think I don't know whether it's true, because I hear varying statistics, and we know about statistics. We can always find statistics to support whatever we're trying to say. But the idea that women, especially women who work outside the home, work a full-time job outside the home and then have another full-time job when they come home. And then there's also this other idea that if you actually sat down and went hour by hour, of course, I'd really love to see the statistic, what this was, that men actually work away from home more often, and that it balances it out. So are we just kind of playing games with the numbers as opposed to not actually going after what's happening in couples' homes?
If we're thinking that everything is going to be 50-50 exactly, that's a problem. It isn't really 50-50. It's that the couple talks about what it is that they're doing and want to do and are able and willing to do. And if that is discussed and that is agreed upon and stuck to, then it doesn't really make a difference whether it's 60-40 or 70-30 or any numerical combination you want to come up with. It's that no one's feeling that he or she is doing more and unfairly. What we want really is for couples to be able to come to a mutually agreeable situation, no matter what it is, even if it's 95-5. Just that it's the choice that they're doing it. They're agreeing about it. They're sticking to it. Someone isn't sliding back, and then someone has to nag or remind or cajole. And I think that kind of becomes an issue. At least what I read is that very often, and I hate to sound like I'm dissing men. I'm the mother of two wonderful young men, and so I don't have an anti-men thing at all. It is often that men make they just can sort of slide away and get away with not get away. They can sometimes not really be fully aware of all of the details that is involved in a household and raising children, and can, on the weekend, he's home from work and off on a bike ride, not even aware that here are some certain things that have to happen. And women generally just don't do that. They don't stop their work week and on Saturday morning go off and go, all right, I'm taking a mountain bike ride. I'll be back around 2 in the afternoon.
Now, maybe they should.
Well, maybe they should. Exactly. However, so, that kind of gets into there's an assumption there that it's okay. So in Darcy Lockman's book, All the Rage, Mothers, Fathers, and the Myth of Equal Partnership, which just came out, she talks about this kind of men being kind of resistant to the little minutia that need to happen. And that I found was super interesting, that they're just kind of resistant to the idea that they need to do something, and when they're not really paying attention to everything, and maybe they're looking at it also and going, I don't want to do it. She's got it. So and that brings into one of the psychological dynamics of the underfunctioner and the overfunctioner, which, by the way, they're a pairing. You cannot have one without the other. So if somebody's underfunctioning, and in many cases it's perceived, or maybe in reality it is the man, then he can't be an underfunctioner without that overfunctioner. And the interesting thing is that the hardest, the more challenging person to change is the overfunctioner, not the underfunctioner. And so, but it is, and again, I hate to generalize, just like you, because, my husband, anytime I do this, he goes, okay, male bashing, pay up. And it's like, I'm not bashing males. But it's interesting because my son, who I love dearly, is a little bit more like me in being an indifferent housekeeper, although it was pretty funny. One day he was complaining about the state of the kitchen floor because he was walking around barefoot. And I said, well, you know where the vacuum cleaner is. And he went and got the vacuum cleaner and vacuumed, because it wasn't bothering me because I was wandering around the house in shoes. But, I actually feel very sorry for whatever woman ends up with him, because he, at least when he was at home, his room was basically a disaster, a tornado. And I basically, my husband wanted him to pick it up. I said, that's not a battle I'm willing to have with him. You want to have that battle? Go ahead, as long as it's not, coming out into the public part of the house. If that's the way he wants to live, I'm not going to go in there. But then I didn't do his laundry either. So that was, it's like I wasn't, he had to do his own laundry. So, it is these ideas about, is it that men are resistant, or are they, or is it the way they're being approached? It could be a lot of things. And also we have to look at how our children are being raised. If they grew up in a very traditional, mom stays home, or mom does the cleaning and the cooking and this and that. And, that's a model. And also, I think, just to be clear, right now what we're talking about is heterosexual couples. In that's true. With lesbians, they share, even if one person does the chores and the childcare more than the other, which does happen, it is discussed and also because it isn't gendered, there isn't the same societal expectations, judgments, and whatever. And let's be honest, there is, being a parent now, there's the antes have been upped, and there's a really high bar of being a good mother and a good father nowadays. Yes. There's, in this social media time that we live in, and it's very pressured, high maintenance parenting, which in parenting wasn't even a word. It was, you just were a parent. Parenting is a new, like, that's what, where did parenting come from? Yes, it is. Right. And a lot of that, I think, exacerbates the situation for couples that, you know, I wish couples were a lot more chill about that. Well, yeah, of course, this also goes all the way back to Freud, and it's the mother's fault. So, you know, it's like, this has been going on for this whole gender, you know, everything's the mom's fault. But again, I think we've upped the ante a little bit about that. I just want to remind people that this is Happily Ever After. It's just the beginning on webtalkradio.net. I'm Leslie Dories, and I'm talking with the co-author of the book, The New I Do, Vicki Larson, about the ongoing battle of household chores and the impact on marriages. And if this is an issue in your household that just seems to be coming up over and over again, and you're tired of dealing with it, take heart. There's an answer. And if you're interested in learning both how to resolve it and repair the damage it has created in your relationship, I can help. So give me a call or shoot me an email and take advantage of my free, no obligation, Create Your Happily Ever After transformation session. You can reach me at area code 919-924-0463, or you can send me an email at Leslie, Lesli, at foundationscoachingnc.com. That's FOUNDATIONS, coaching, N as in Nancy, C as in Charlie.com. And I want to get back to this conversation about chores and what they mean, and I'm going to go back to the titles of our articles. So can you explain, Vicki, what the mistake is by assuming a husband will do his fair share?
Well, you know what they say about assuming. I can't say it here, but you can break that word apart. So assumptions... assumptions are really dangerous, no matter what you're assuming. Because what we really want, especially in our intimate relationships, is clarity. And so I was playing with the idea of if you want clarity and you want to have a partner who is more equal with you in whatever it is, you can't assume. You have to actually discuss. You have to not only discuss.
You mean we have to talk about it?
We have to talk about it. You know, I don't know how many times we hear from any article we're reading about, relationships or marriages, and they say communication is key, and yet I'm not sure why this is not being fully communicated. And actually, I think that people do talk about it, and then they find themselves sliding back into older teens. So the reason why I said to assume that, don't assume, because I don't think we really want assumptions in anything when it comes to a romantic relationship, especially if you're living with that person and you're raising children with that person. Assumptions will lead into dangerous, unhappy areas that we don't want to go to. We want to not assume.
Yes.
And we want to really have that discussion. Hey, so we both want children and we both work. How are we going to make this work? How do you see us creating a situation where we're both going to this and that? And you don't just have one conversation. You have many. You have many, and you keep, and as I think you know, I'm very big on creating a relationship or marital contract in which not only do you talk about it, but you write it down, and that becomes the baseline, and then you revisit it. And you write it down because what you really want is your partner and yourself to hold each other and yourselves accountable. Yes, I agreed to that. And we're finding ourselves doing something different. What happened? Why did we veer off course? And how maybe that was unrealistic. Maybe we need to rethink it now that we've experienced what it's like. And it takes away any misunderstanding that can happen and unrealistic expectations of what we think will happen.
Well, and I think that's so important because, and you talked about this before, and of course we all have kind of it's background noise, but it's not just noise, it's actually real, that we have these experiences growing up. I tell people that, our mothers and our fathers are our first teachers, examples of what's a man, what's a woman, what's a husband, what's a wife, what's a mother, what's a father. That's what we learn by osmosis, by being in our households. And that sticks with us. And, in without making a conscious choice to do something different, that's the fallback position. And going back, so it's, do I want to do this? But, I remember my mother-in-law when she would come to visit, and my husband was very active with the kids. In fact, he was actually in charge of the bedtime routine. So when he would travel, I would be like, oh my gosh, it's their bedtime. Because it was just completely, I wasn't paying any attention because he handled it. And I think that's also what happens when women handle things. Like I was telling you before we went on air, I used to joke that because I was in charge of the kids' extracurricular activities, my husband knew about them, but I was the one who had the logistics. I used to joke that if I got hit by a bus, he'd never find the kids. Because that was something he didn't have to actively think about, and
right.
He knew where their school was. He was involved, but he didn't have to have all of the details. And
yes,
so bedtime routine is like, oh my gosh, I've got to do this, because it's not front and center, and we fall back into those old positions. And my mother-in-law used to say, well, my father-in-law would never do those things. And I said, yeah, because he didn't have to, but we do. We have this discussion about who's going to do what. And it shifted over the years based on the age of the kids and his job and my job. It's not static. And I think that the idea of actually putting it in writing is so important, because when people have a discussion and they walk away, they don't necessarily think they've agreed to what the other person thinks they've agreed to, because but if it's written down, it's like, okay, here is what we are agreeing to, then there's no confusion.
Right.
It's literally there in black and white.
Yes. Yes. And, it's great to kind of tag team. That's part of the beauty of being a two-person household, is that you don't have to do everything. This person can do that, that person can that. But and that works out really well. It's only when it's kind of falling mostly on one person who doesn't want it to all fall on him or herself. That's the key.
Exactly.
If one person wants to do it, that's wonderful. So that needs to be acknowledged, that some people actually do want to do it. It matters to them, and they do it happily, and that's their arrangement. So that's great. I wrote a post a while ago about, if you really want to stay married, get divorced, because what I noticed And what a lot of other women noticed was that once they became divorced and they had 50-50 co-parenting arrangements, so my former husband physically had our children for a week, and then I had them for a week, he, had to know what was going on in their lives and make dentist appointments or take them, or if there was a birthday party, he had to buy the gift and wrap it and take the kid. In other words, he became much more wrapped up in what I was doing when he didn't have to do it. And a lot of men become much better hands-on fathers when that happens. And so I don't want to say...
And my feeling about that I would rather them learn how to do that without having to get divorced.
Exactly. So I'm not promoting divorce, but the thing is, if it's able to happen in that situation, it's able to happen within a marriage where you're living together, or even if you live apart from each other, it's able to happen. Right. And you have to just make sure that it does happen. And the way to make sure is to not assume, to talk, and to hold each other accountable on what is agreed to. And if...
Well, and...
Yeah.
Go ahead.
No.
I like that because, my husband lived on his own. He did not come straight from his mother's house. He was on his own. He knew how to cook. He knew how to take care. He knew how to do laundry. He knew how to take care of himself. And I was joking about my son. He actually knows how to do laundry, and he knows how to cook, and obviously he knows how to run a vacuum cleaner. So if these people have been living on their own, then they have been functioning on some level on their own. And so it's more like sitting down and talking about what needs to be done and not becoming an overfunctioner, not, automatically picking up somebody's socks off the floor. Or,
right.
The prototypical, where are my clean socks? It's like, I don't know, did you do the laundry?
Yes.
But the assumption is that it would be this person's job versus that person's job. It's like, well, who did the laundry when you lived by yourself? Kind of what you're saying, that when people get divorced, there is the challenge of you don't have any say in what goes on in your ex's household, which has created some challenges for some of my clients. But it's this idea that they, that people are competent, they can learn. So I guess it's a question of how do we invite them to learn, or how do we invite them to step into it?
Right, and that gets back to what we were talking about, that there's no assumptions that she's going to be the one to do it or he's going to be the one to do that. It's just what you want is clarity. When Susan and I were doing research for our book, what we found over and over is that couples who had matched expectations were more satisfied in their relationships, no matter what it was, even if it was, a covenant marriage or no matter their arrangement. Right. They didn't assume. They both agreed to what was going to happen and what they were going to be doing, and then they found a mutually satisfying relationship, and I think that's what all of us really want. That's what we want. We want to feel heard, respected, acknowledged, and loved in our romantic partnerships. And there is a way to make that happen. It just has to, it just needs some clarity. No one has to get married nowadays. Right. No one has to have children. No one has, it's right. So we're making choices.
Right. It's
and we need to just carry through with those choices to say, this is how the household is going to be run, and we're both agreeing to that, and we're choosing how it's going to be done, and just work from there.
Well, and exactly, and the expectations, the assumptions, I call assumptions the gremlins of relationships, because if I'm making an assumption or if I have an expectation of you and you either don't know about it or aren't on board with it and therefore it's not going to happen, then that's going to create the problem. And it's, because I have the expectation that my partner is going to do something, could be sorely disappointed if he's not on board with doing that, or vice versa. My husband he does these things where he'll hit the limit. He'll go, okay, the house is a mess. We need to clean it up. Okay, which is fine. And I said to him, it's like, well, I'm more than happy to clean up the house, just not right at this moment because I'm doing something else. So if you want to do it right now, you're going to be doing it on your own. If you want my help, then we need to do it in a couple of hours or whatever it is. I used to call it, because it's like, that was the expectation. It's like the expectation was I was going to jump up. It's like, oh no, I'm not. I'm happy to work on this with you. I'm happy to do my part. I'm just not going to do it right now. And I think that's another thing that gets people that expectation that because I'm ready to do it, you're going to be on board.
Right.
Sometimes, but again, that's the kind of thing that if we have a contract that says, Saturday before we go play, we do the work around the house that we need to get done, and that work includes these 5 things, and then we can go play. So then we can go on we can go on the bike ride or go play tennis or go to the movies or watch the game or whatever the heck it is we want to do, go shopping, whatever. But that's something we've agreed to. Right.
Yeah. And that's,
and
that's what we want. Agreement.
Yeah. Right.
No arguments,
and
no resentments, no frustrations, just clarity, agreements, and then keeping those agreements and not sliding back. Yeah.
Right. And then and also revisiting them when what I consider like, a major life change. So we're moving, or somebody has a different job, or we have a child, or we have another child, or, we bring in, and we have to revisit these things because they're not cast in stone.
Nope. Yes, exactly.
And I love that idea of the contract. So can you tell people more about where they can follow you, where they can get your book, all that wonderful information?
Well, as you mentioned, and thank you so much, I do have a blog, OMG Chronicles, and I post a new blog post every Tuesday morning. So you can join me there, where I generally tackle issues that are happening in the media. I am also very active on Twitter at OMG Chronicles. I'm on Instagram as well, and I'm Facebook, but I'm silly on Facebook, so don't expect much meat there. And then our book, The New I Do, Reshaping Marriage for Skeptics, Realists, and Rebels, can be found at your local independent bookstore and also places like Amazon. And I am always open to have people contact me and chat about whatever it is that they want to talk about. My goal is to help couples or people, individual people too, have the most authentic and satisfying life that they want, and to help them fight whatever images they have in their head of stereotypes of what a woman or man should or shouldn't do, and just be their most authentic person, and to help them find a life that will allow them to live that way.
And I could not agree more. And, today we've been talking about marriage, and marriage is both a legal and emotional contract. And for too many people, the terms of their contract are vague and ill-defined. So even if you and your partner truly desire an egalitarian relationship, do you know what that means and how it will play out in your everyday life? It's not completely realistic to account for every possible life scenario, but leaving things to chance, assumptions, and expectations is a recipe for disaster. So what areas of your marriage would be helped if you had a more formal written contract? And what would it take to get you to write one? So Vicki's book can help. And keep listening to this show because you'll also get some more ideas. And until next week, stay loving.